Whispers began in dimly lit corridors where power is traded in silence and handshakes carry the weight of nations. In back rooms far from cameras and headlines, Traore's name began to surface in conversations that made even seasoned diplomats lean in closer. They said he was not meeting his usual allies and he was not following the predictable script the West expected of him. Instead, he was moving like a shadow across borders, touching cities where new power centers were rising. No official schedules, no public speeches, just sudden disappearances from Ouagadougou followed by unconfirmed sightings in places the EU considered off-limits for African leaders. It was the kind of movement intelligence agencies hate because they can track it but they cannot explain it. Every time he returned to Burkina Faso, his eyes carried the look of a man who had seen the pieces of a bigger chessboard. And with each return something in his tone became sharper, as if he had been promised things the West could never offer him. Officials inside European ministries began to take note, but their reports were vague, full of words like possible contact and potential negotiation. The truth was they didn't know who exactly he was meeting with or what was being discussed, only that the frequency of these encounters was increasing. Some claimed they saw him in the Gulf seated with leaders who had their own grudges against European overreach. Others whispered of meetings in North Africa with figures who openly defied Western sanctions and smiled while doing it. The rumors began to blend into something more dangerous, patterns that suggested these were not random diplomatic visits but carefully plotted connections. Each meeting was said to involve a select few hand-picked individuals known for their ability to move money, weapons and influence without leaving fingerprints. Some contacts were reportedly tied to emerging economic blocs in the Middle East, others to underground resistance networks in Africa's own Sahel belt. None of this made the nightly news, but in intelligence memos Traore's name began appearing alongside words like realignment and strategic divergence. The EU understood enough to realize that if these rumors were true, the very supply lines they depended on could one day be rerouted without warning. Netanyahu's advisors caught wind of it too, noting that such alliances could shift trade routes and arms flows in ways that would weaken Israel's regional leverage. In the shadows, Traore was assembling something that no single power could stop without stepping into open confrontation. Each handshake carried not just the weight of mutual benefit but the unspoken defiance of a continent tired of being dictated to. Witnesses said the atmosphere in these meetings was electric, filled with the understanding that history might be tilting in a new direction. No speeches were recorded, no agreements published, yet the people leaving those rooms walked out with the kind of conviction that only comes from a shared mission. Even in the most guarded EU strategy sessions, his name started surfacing with a mix of irritation and unease. To them he was becoming a variable they couldn't calculate, a disruptor who refused to fit into their frameworks of dependency and control. The mystery deepened when several senior African officials admitted in private that they had no idea where Traore was heading next or who exactly he was working with. It was as if he was weaving an invisible net across continents, one that only he could see the full shape of. There were reports of encrypted communications routed through servers outside the reach of Western surveillance systems. Diplomatic envoys were quietly pulled from posts in regions where Traore's influence was suspected to be growing. In the streets of Ouagadougou few knew the specifics, but they could sense something was changing in the air. Markets spoke of new trade possibilities, soldiers whispered of stronger defenses, merchants hinted at unfamiliar currencies being discussed behind closed doors. For those paying attention, the scale of his ambition was undeniable. This was not the maneuvering of a man content with managing a single nation's affairs. This was the movement of someone trying to redraw the lines of power themselves. And in capitals across Europe and the Middle East, decision-makers began to realize that every meeting he held without them was a door closing on their influence forever. They had underestimated the quiet urgency of his travels, the speed with which he could build trust among leaders who had little reason to trust anyone. The rumors no longer felt like rumors, they felt like the beginning of a shift too deep to reverse once it locked into place. Each silent handshake was a spark, and together they were beginning to look like a fire no one could contain.